Here's what this video is actually going to do for you. By the end of it, you will know exactly how to stop wasting your energy on things you cannot change and start putting all of it into the 3 or 4 things you actually can. That's the whole promise. Not a vague sense of calm, a specific, repeatable skill. Picture this. You're lying in bed at 11:47 p.m., replaying a comment your coworker made in a meeting 8 hours ago, rehearsing the perfect comeback you'll never actually say. Meanwhile, the thing you actually needed to prepare for tomorrow is still sitting untouched in a browser tab. That's not an accident. That's a system malfunction. And here's the contrarian part. Most of what you call caring is actually just a more socially acceptable form of losing control. Later in this video, I'm going to show you why the popular advice to just let go actually backfires for most people who try it and what to do instead. But first, if you've ever laid awake replaying something you can't change, type replay in the comments right now. Let's get into it. You wake up and before your feet touch the floor, you've already checked your phone. Not because you needed to, because some part of you needed to know what happened while you were unconscious, who texted, who didn't, what the world decided about you overnight. You scroll past a headline that ruins your mood for an hour, even though you have zero say in it. You get to work and someone's tone in an email feels off, and now you're drafting 3 versions of a reply in your head while your actual tasks pile up. By lunch, you've spent more emotional energy managing other people's moods, opinions, and decisions than you've spent on your own life. This is the quiet tax nobody tells you about. Not a dramatic collapse, a slow leak. Every time you replay a conversation you can't undo, you're spending minutes you'll never get back. Every time you brace for how someone might react to a text you haven't even sent yet, you're paying interest on a debt that isn't yours. The cost isn't just time, it's your self-respect, because a person constantly monitoring the outside world for permission to feel okay is a person who has quietly handed over the keys to their own mind. And it's your peace, because peace requires a floor that doesn't move, and if that floor is other people's behavior, the market, the traffic, the weather, you will never stand still. Think about how much of your day is actually spent this way. You check the weather app 3 times before a trip you've already packed for, as if checking again will change what's coming. You watch the little typing bubble appear and disappear in a conversation, and your whole mood shifts based on 3 dots that mean nothing yet. You drive behind someone going 10 under the speed limit and feel your jaw tighten, your hands grip the wheel a little harder over a decision that belongs entirely to a stranger you'll never see again. None of these moments feel significant on their own. That's exactly the problem. They don't cost you all at once. They cost you in small change all day, every day, until you reach the evening exhausted and can't quite explain why, because nothing big happened. Nothing big has to happen. The leak doesn't need a crisis. It just needs your attention, and it will take as much of it as you're willing to give. Notice too that none of this required a crisis to happen. That's what makes it so easy to ignore and so expensive to keep carrying. There's no single dramatic day you can point to and say, that's when it started. It accumulates in ordinary Tuesdays, one small unnecessary worry at a time, until it just becomes what your baseline feels like, and you forget it was ever optional. Almost 2,000 years ago, a man named Epictetus, who started life as a slave and ended it teaching Roman senators, built his entire philosophy around one blunt observation. He said, some things are up to us and some things are not. Your opinions, your effort, your choices, those are yours. Everything else, other people's opinions, outcomes, reputation, even your own body's health belongs to a category he called not up to us. Not because it doesn't matter, because you don't get a vote. And he noticed something most people still haven't caught up to 2,000 years later. The specific exact moment you start treating not up to us as if it were up to us is the exact moment you sign yourself up for suffering that was never necessary in the first place. So here's the core idea, and I want to state it as plainly as I can because most videos on this topic make it sound mystical when it's actually mechanical. The habit is this: before you spend energy on anything, ask one question: is this actually mine to control? If the honest answer is no, you don't ignore it, you don't suppress it, you don't pretend you don't care. You simply stop feeding it your attention, the way you'd stop pouring water into a cup that has a hole in the bottom. Let's be precise about what this does not mean, because this is where most people get it wrong and quit. Detachment is not indifference. It is not becoming a person who shrugs at everything and calls it peace. It is not letting people walk over you because it's not up to me how they treat me. You still act, you still show up, prepare, try, love people fully. The difference is where your emotional chips are placed on your effort, which you control completely, instead of on the outcome, which you never fully control at all. And this directly opposes what the modern world rewards. Right now, the entire culture is built on the opposite instinct. Stay plugged in, have an opinion on everything, take everything personally because that's what proves you care. Refresh the numbers, watch the reactions roll in. Being engaged with everything all the time is treated like a virtue. But engagement with things outside your control isn't strength. It's just a more exhausting way to feel powerless, dressed up as passion. Notice how often the people who seem the most on top of everything are actually the most depleted. They have an opinion on the news cycle, the coworker's tone, the friend's relationship, the stranger's parenting choices online, and they call this being informed, being involved, being someone who cares. But caring was never supposed to mean carrying. You can care about 100 things and still only be responsible for a handful of them. The rest is just noise wearing the costume of concern, and the culture keeps handing you more of it because a person who's constantly reacting is a person who's easy to keep hooked. Detachment, done right, isn't about caring less. It's about finally being precise about what your care is actually for. Let's start with the one that touches almost everyone first, because it's the most obvious leak, and the one you're probably feeling right now without naming it, what other people think of you. Picture a group chat. Someone posts a photo from a dinner you weren't invited to. Nothing dramatic happened. Nobody said anything unkind. And yet you spend the next 20 minutes doing forensic analysis. Was it intentional? Did I say something last time? Am I being phased out? Building an entire narrative out of a single photo, none of which you can verify and none of which you can currently change. Epictetus used to tell his students something almost uncomfortably direct. If someone insults you, the insult doesn't actually hurt you. Your judgment about the insult is what hurts you. Strip away the story you're telling yourself about what it means, and what's left is just information, not injury. He wasn't saying words don't matter. He was pointing out that the sting comes from the meaning you assign, and meaning is one of the few things that actually is up to you. There's a well-documented psychological pattern that explains why this feels so consuming. It's called the spotlight effect. People dramatically overestimate how much others notice and remember what they do because each of us is the star of our own movie, and we assume everyone else is watching that movie too. In reality, most people are starring in their own movie, worrying about their own hair, their own job, their own group chat. The dinner photo that kept you up wasn't even a supporting scene in anyone else's story. So here's the reframe. The anxious replaying isn't proof you're unlikable. It's proof you're human, running an outdated alarm system that treats someone might disapprove like a predator is nearby. Nothing is wrong with you. Something is just overactive, and overactive things can be retrained. That's the whole point of a habit-based approach instead of a just believe in yourself approach. The action today is small but specific. Next time you catch yourself building a theory about what someone thinks of you, say silently or out loud, "Not up to me," and physically redirect your attention to one task in front of you. Not forever, just for the next 10 minutes. That's the entire rep. It gets harder in professional settings where the stakes feel higher because reputation is attached to income and opportunity, not just feelings. You send a proposal and imagine your manager's exact facial expression while reading it. You picture the specific words they'll use to describe you in a meeting you're not in. None of this is information. It's fiction, generated by a brain that would rather manufacture certainty, even bad certainty, than sit in the discomfort of not knowing. And here's what makes it worse. The fictional version you build is almost always harsher than reality. Because an anxious mind doesn't imagine neutral outcomes. It imagines the worst one, rehearses it, and then treats the rehearsal as evidence. You end up defending yourself against a trial that never happened in a courtroom that only exists in your own head. Let's go one level higher stakes, because opinions are one thing, outcomes are where it gets personal. You submit the application, send the pitch, or go on the date, and immediately your brain starts running outcome simulations. Did I say the wrong thing? What if they choose someone else? What if I don't get it? Notice what's happening. You already did the work. The part that was yours is finished. And yet, you're now spending just as much energy, sometimes more, on the part that was never yours to begin with, their decision. Seneca, writing letters to a friend near the end of his life, made an observation that still lands like a slap today. He said, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality, that most of what wrecks people isn't the actual event, it's the 100 rehearsals of the event that happen before it ever occurs, or after it's already over and can't be changed. You're not being hurt by the rejection, you're being hurt in advance, by a rejection that hasn't even happened yet and might never happen at all." Here's the counterintuitive part, and I want you to actually sit with this one instead of nodding past it. The more outcome-focused you become, the worse your actual performance tends to get. Psychologists call this an external locus of control, the belief that results are determined by outside forces rather than your own actions. People with a strong external locus of control report more anxiety and lower performance under pressure because their nervous system is essentially trying to control something it has no lever for, which produces stress with nowhere to go. You're not just wasting energy worrying about the outcome, you're actively making the outcome worse by worrying about it. Compare that to someone with a strong internal locus of control, at least around the things that are genuinely theirs to influence their preparation, their effort, their attention to detail. That person walks into the same interview, the same pitch meeting, the same first date with a completely different internal experience, not because they don't care about the result, but because all their energy is still available for the parts they can actually shape. Nothing is being siphoned off into simulations of a future that hasn't happened yet. That's the real advantage detachment gives you. It's not just less suffering, it's more usable energy because none of it is being spent on a problem you have no lever for in the first place. The reframe here is liberating if you actually let it land. Your job was never to guarantee the result. Your job was to submit good work, show up prepared, say something true. If you did that, you already won the only part of the game that was yours to play. The action. After you do something you can't control the result of. Write one sentence, "I did my part," and physically close the tab, the laptop, the conversation. Give yourself a hard stop on rehearsal. You get to submit once. You don't get to submit it in your head another 40 times. This shows up in smaller doses too, not just the big applications and pitches. You send a text and watch the read receipt like it's a scoreboard. You post something and refresh to see how many people responded, treating the number like a verdict on your worth instead of what it actually is, a number. Every one of these is the same pattern wearing a different outfit. Work that's finished, followed by energy spent on a result that's already out of your hands. The finish line keeps moving because you never actually let yourself cross it. You cross the real finish line, the effort, and then invent a second, fake one made entirely of other people's responses and spend all your remaining energy running toward that instead. Quick question for you, and be honest when you answer it in your head. Whose behavior have you been trying to manage today that isn't actually yours to manage? Because the next level up is harder than opinions, harder than outcomes. It's the people you love. Think about the parent who keeps sending unsolicited advice about your career, or the adult sibling still making choices you'd never make yourself, and you find yourself lying awake constructing the speech that will finally get through to them. You're not trying to control a stranger's opinion anymore. You're trying to control someone whose well-being you actually care about, which makes it feel not just reasonable, but responsible. Marcus Aurelius, ruling an empire and writing private notes to himself that he never intended anyone to read, kept returning to the same discipline, waking each morning and reminding himself he would encounter people who are unreasonable, ungrateful, or difficult that day, not as a prediction of doom, but as a rehearsal, so their behavior wouldn't hijack his. He wasn't saying don't care about people. He was saying don't confuse loving someone with being responsible for the outcome of their choices, because those are two entirely different jobs and only one of them is yours. There's a concept in psychology called differentiation of self, which describes the ability to stay emotionally connected to someone while still maintaining a separate sense of your own thoughts and feelings instead of merging your peace with their choices. Low differentiation looks like this. Their bad mood becomes your bad mood. Their bad decision becomes your emergency. Their unresolved problem becomes the thing keeping you up at 2 a.m. High differentiation looks like caring deeply and still sleeping fine. This is where a lot of people quietly resist the whole idea, because it can feel like differentiation means loving people less or caring less about how their lives turn out. It doesn't. Think about the calmest, most grounded person you know, the one everyone goes to during a crisis. not because they don't feel anything, but because they don't get swept into the current along with you. That steadiness isn't distance. It's actually what makes them useful in the first place. A person who panics right alongside you can't help you find solid ground because they're standing in the same water you are. The people who help the most are almost always the ones who stayed differentiated enough to keep their footing. The reframe, letting someone own the consequences of their own choices, isn't cold. It's actually the most respectful thing you can do because it treats them as a capable adult instead of a problem for you to solve. The action. The next time you feel the urge to fix, manage, or steer someone else's decision, ask yourself one question first. Am I helping because they asked or because I can't tolerate watching them struggle? If it's the second one, that discomfort is information about you, not a call to action about them. There's a name for part of what's happening here too: cognitive dissonance. Watching someone you love make a choice that contradicts what you believe is good for them creates an uncomfortable gap between your values and your observation. And the fastest way to close that gap isn't to change your values. It's to try to change their behavior, so the discomfort goes away. That urge to intervene often has less to do with them and more to do with resolving your own discomfort as quickly as possible. This one is harder to practice than the first two because it doesn't feel selfish to worry about people you love. It feels like the opposite. It feels like devotion. But watch what actually happens the next time someone close to you makes a choice you disagree with. You'll notice your body respond before your mind does. The tight chest, the urge to interrupt, the mental drafting of the perfect argument that will finally get through. That physical reaction isn't proof they need saving. It's proof you've temporarily forgotten where the line is between their life and yours. The people who actually change their choices rarely do it because someone managed them into it. They do it in their own time, for their own reasons. And usually the relationship that helped most was the one that stayed steady instead of the one that kept pulling at them. If you've made it this far, you already think differently than most people watching this. Most viewers drop off well before now, which means you're the kind of person who actually finishes what you start, which is exactly the trait this entire video is trying to sharpen. Do me one favor before we go further. Hit the like button now while it's on your mind, because it genuinely tells the algorithm this is worth showing to someone else who needs it. And remember that thing I said backfires for most people who try the obvious version of letting go. We're about to get into exactly why and what to do instead so it actually sticks. So far we've been talking about things happening around you. Now let's talk about something that already happened, which is a strange category because it feels like it should be even more fixed, even more clearly not up to us. And yet it's the one people fight hardest to control. You said the wrong thing at your friend's wedding 4 years ago. You chose the safe job instead of the risky one. You didn't call before your grandmother passed. And some quiet room in your mind keeps the lights on for that memory, replaying it, negotiating with it, trying to find the sentence that would have made it come out differently. There is no such sentence. There never was. The event ended. Only the replay is still running, and the replay is entirely optional. Marcus Aurelius wrote something to himself that's easy to read quickly and miss the weight of. He said the only thing anyone truly loses is the present moment, because that's the only thing anyone actually has. You can't lose the past because it isn't yours to hold anymore, and you can't lose the future because it hasn't arrived. Which means when you spend today relitigating yesterday, you're not protecting anything. You're spending your one available currency on a transaction that already closed. Here's the psychological piece, and it has a real name: rumination. It's the tendency to churn over the same negative memory repeatedly without reaching resolution, and researchers who study it have found it doesn't process the pain, it deepens the groove. Each replay makes the memory feel more urgent, not more resolved. The same way running your tongue over a cut doesn't heal it, it just keeps it raw. You are not thinking your way out of the past, you are wearing a track into it. The reframe. The fact that a memory still hurts doesn't mean it's unfinished business. It might just mean you haven't given yourself permission to stop reopening it. The action for today is almost embarrassingly simple, and that's exactly why it works. The next time the old memory surfaces, don't argue with it, don't defend yourself against it in your head. Just say, that already happened, and let it pass through like weather. No debate, no verdict required. Here's what makes the past feel different from opinions or outcomes or other people. It feels solvable, even though it isn't. With a live situation, there's at least a chance, however small, of influencing what happens next. With the past, there's nothing left to influence, and yet the brain treats it like an unsolved case it can still crack if it just reviews the footage one more time. That's the trap. You're not trying to change the past when you replay it. You're trying to feel differently about it right now in the present and mistaking the replay for progress. But replaying isn't processing. Processing means feeling it once, honestly, and then setting it down. Replaying means picking it back up every single day and calling that remembering when it's actually refusing to let it end. You can test this on yourself right now. Think of the memory that bothers you most, the one you already know, the one that surfaces at 2 a.m. more than any other. Ask yourself honestly, has replaying it, even once, changed a single fact about what happened? Has it produced a new piece of information you didn't already have? Almost certainly not. What it has produced is a very familiar, very well-worn emotional groove, one your mind can slide into almost automatically now, because you've practiced it so many times. That's the uncomfortable truth about rumination. It isn't something that happens to you. At a certain point, it's something you've trained yourself to be good at without ever meaning to. And now here's where it gets sharp, because there's one thing left on the list that most self-help content is too careful to say out loud, and it's the one that actually changes everything once you look at it directly. Your own mortality. You don't control when you die. You don't control most of how. This is, statistically, the single largest not up to us of your entire existence, and it's also the one people spend the most energy pretending isn't real, buried under productivity, scrolling, distraction, 5-year plans built as if the plan itself guarantees the years. Seneca didn't dance around this. He said most people don't fear death, they fear thinking about death, which is a completely different problem, because the thinking is what would actually force them to notice how much of their limited time they're spending on things that were never theirs to control in the first place. He wasn't being morbid. He was pointing out that death isn't the enemy of a good life. Distraction from your own mortality is, because it's the thing that lets you keep postponing the life you actually want in favor of managing everyone else's opinions, outcomes, and choices. There's a reason this idea sits underneath every single thing we've talked about so far, instead of being just one more item on the list. Terror management theory, a well-studied idea in psychology, proposes that a huge portion of human behavior exists specifically to manage the discomfort of knowing we're mortal, that people build routines, chase status, seek approval, and stay busy partly as a buffer against sitting still with that awareness. Look back at everything covered so far through that lens, and it reorganizes itself. The compulsive checking of what people think of you, the rehearsal of outcomes before they happen, the gripping need to manage people you love instead of trusting them, the looping replay of a past you can't touch. Every one of them keeps your mind occupied with something that at least feels manageable, so it never has to sit, even for a minute, with the one thing that genuinely isn't. This is not a character flaw, it's a defense mechanism. So old and so common, it's basically part of the operating system. But a defense mechanism you can name is one you can finally choose to put down, the same way naming any pattern is usually the first real step toward changing it, instead of just repeating it on autopilot for another decade. This is the turn. Here's the paradox at the center of everything we've covered. You spend most of your waking hours trying to control the small, uncontrollable things, a comment, a result, someone else's choice, a memory, precisely because thinking about the one enormous, uncontrollable thing is too frightening to sit with. The opinions, the outcomes, the other people's choices, the replayed past, none of that is really about them. It's a smokescreen, a way to feel like you're managing something, anything, so you don't have to face the one thing that can't be managed at all. And here's the part that sounds backwards until you actually live it. The moment you stop trying to control your own ending, you get your attention back for the only thing you ever actually had this specific day, right now, the one you keep spending on things that were never yours. This is exactly why just let go fails for most people who try it, because they try to let go of the small stuff while still white-knuckling the big stuff underneath it. You can't successfully release your grip on a coworker's opinion while your nervous system is still quietly bracing against the fact of your own death. The The small detachments only hold once the big one is acknowledged. That's the order almost nobody teaches, and it's the entire reason the obvious version of this advice keeps failing people who genuinely try it. Think about the last time you tried to not care about something and it didn't work. You probably told yourself it doesn't matter, tried to think about something else, maybe even said the word whatever out loud. And the thought came right back anyway, usually within minutes, often stronger than before. That's not a personal failure. That's what happens when you try to override a signal without addressing what's generating it. Telling yourself not to care about a text message while your deeper wiring is still quietly convinced that being disliked is a survival level threat is like turning down the volume on a smoke alarm instead of checking whether there's a fire. The volume knob was never the problem. Once you actually acknowledge the real fire, the fact that your time is limited and no amount of managing other people's opinions will change that the small alarm stop needing to scream so loud because they were only ever standing in for the big one. So picture the version of you that's actually done this work. You wake up and the first 10 minutes belong to you, not your phone. You read the message that would have wrecked your morning a year ago, and you notice something interesting happens instead of the old spiral. Nothing happens. It's just words. You send the pitch, the application, the message, and you close the laptop because your part is finished and the rest was never yours. You walk into the meeting where someone's tone is off, and instead of spending the next hour decoding it, you simply do your job and let their mood be their mood. You notice you have room in your head you didn't have before, room that used to be occupied by a running tally of who might be upset with you, what it might mean, what you should say about it later. That room is just yours now. You get to fill it with something else, a conversation you're actually present for, a project you actually finish instead of half finishing while distracted by a dozen open loops that were never yours to close. Someone you love makes a choice you wouldn't make. You feel the pull to fix it, and you let the pull pass through you like weather, because you've learned the difference between loving someone and carrying them. You still show up for them completely. You just stop mistaking your discomfort for their emergency. The old memory surfaces. Sometimes it still will, but it passes through in seconds instead of hours because you've stopped arguing with it. You notice it, you let it be true that it happened, and you keep walking. It doesn't get a vote in how your afternoon goes anymore. And underneath all of it, quietly, is the awareness that your time is finite, not as a source of dread, but as the reason today actually matters. This is the part most people never expect. The same fact that used to sit in the background as a low hum of anxiety becomes, once you actually face it instead of avoiding it, the thing that makes everything else easier to release. Not because your life got smaller or safer, because you finally know what deserves your attention and what doesn't. And that clarity is worth more than certainty ever was. The chaos doesn't go away. People are still difficult. Outcomes are still uncertain. Time is still short. What changes is that none of it has a hook in you anymore. You're not calmer because the world got smaller. You're calmer because you finally know exactly which parts of it were always yours to hold, and you've stopped exhausting yourself trying to hold the rest. Here's your challenge, and I want you to actually do this, not just nod along. For the next 7 days, every single time you feel that familiar tightness, the racing thoughts about what someone thinks, what might happen, what someone else should do differently, what you should have done differently, stop and ask one question: is this mine? If it's not, you don't fight it, you don't suppress it, you just stop feeding it. The same way you'd stop watering a plant you already know is dead. Keep it simple. You don't need a journal, a system, a tracker, or an app to track it. None of that machinery is the point, and building it can quietly become just another way to avoid the actual practice. You just need the one question asked honestly in the moment it actually matters, not after the spiral has already run its full course, but right at the start of it, when you first notice your attention reaching for something that was never yours to hold. Some days you'll catch it in the first second. Other days you'll catch it 20 minutes in, halfway through building an entire imaginary courtroom in your head. Both count. The goal isn't perfect execution. The goal is building the reflex, one rep at a time, the same way any real skill gets built slowly, with plenty of missed reps along the way, until one day you notice you did it without even thinking about it. Not up to us doesn't mean it doesn't matter. It means it was never yours to carry in the first place. Say that back to yourself the next time your chest tightens over something you can't touch, and notice how much lighter the sentence is than the thing you were carrying instead. If you're taking this challenge, type "mine" in the comments right now, partly for me, but mostly so you can scroll back in 7 days and see whether you actually did it. And if this kind of thinking is something you want more of, subscribe, because this channel exists to keep handing you tools like this one. Thanks for watching all the way through. Stay grounded.